I think from a very early age, I got really fascinated with the past.
We had planned for Laura Meyer to interview Nancy at her studio on the afternoon of September 19th. All the details were arranged weeks in advance, and Nancy had planned to leave her dog Daisy with a friend during the shoot.
Let's first start. Mic check, Nancy.
Okay, mic check.
What'd you have for breakfast today, Nancy?
Oh, what did I have for breakfast? Oh my God. Scrambled eggs and orange juice.
Okay, cool. Laura, we'll get a mic check from you. What'd you have for breakfast?
I had Cheerios.
Oh, that's what the boys had. My grandsons were here all weekend.
I got a call from Nancy about 2 hours before. When she arrived to drop Daisy off, she learned that her friend had died. We didn't know what to do, but we decided to continue with the filming. In a way, this film is about loss and all the small things, the remnants that stay behind after things end. These are the materials Nancy Youdelman uses in her work.
My father was a merchant marine sea captain. He was in charge of ships and sailed and was gone for a year at a time or 6 months. But at some point, he got a job working in the piers in San Francisco, so we moved to San Francisco.
When your father was out on his journeys, when he came home, how long was he home? And what was that like?
He was home for very short periods, and it was actually really wonderful because he would bring things from all over the world. My mother at one point asked for some silk from China, and he brought back 90 yards, like huge bolts of fabric. Also, my mother was a nurse before she was married, and after we were born, she worked for a seamstress, so she did a lot of sewing. There's something in the air in San Francisco. It's always cooler. There's an ocean breeze. It was exciting, and as kids, we had a lot of freedom. Myself, a neighbor girl named Mari, and my sister Rachel, we'd a lot of times on the weekend go to Playland at the beach, which was this really wonderful amusement park. It had been built around the turn of the 20th century. So by the 1950s, it was already getting kind of shabby, and there was a fun house, there were arcades, there were a roller coaster and various other things. And then right nearby was the Cliff House, which was, it was a restaurant, but they had a museum of oddities. And that was one of my favorite things to go to, partly because we just got to see the most bizarre things there. Like Tom Thumb's wedding clothes were in a glass case. And I'll never forget that because Tom Thumb was a circus performer for Barnum and Bailey. His suit was, not more than 2 feet high. And what I really loved was his wife's wedding dress, a Victorian wedding dress. They were married in the late 1800s. This beautiful dress in the case, and being able to do all that stuff on our own as kids was really one of the best parts of my childhood.
Your father got ill when you were 9 years old and then died just three months later. How did that affect you and your family?
Well, my mother told me that he was going to die. I remember it very clearly. We were standing near the window and she said, "Your father is sick." But I remember her saying, "He's going to die in 6 months." And I remember not even understanding that, just looking at her very blankly. I really didn't know what that meant. And then he actually died much sooner. He never went to the hospital. He just stayed in our flat in San Francisco. And I remember him being in a hospital bed and just never really talking about it. And then after he died, he was just gone. Shortly after that, we moved to Fresno. So it was like my father's death. Moving to Fresno, my life suddenly changed in that sense, that wonderful sense of freedom and openness and possibility was gone, literally gone. But we did spend a lot of time at the cemetery. We'd go there usually on Sunday, and my mother would bring food. We'd have a picnic. She'd have, I think she either had a folding chair or a blanket, and we'd sit and eat. And I once asked her why we didn't go to the park for a picnic, and she said the park was too crowded. Of course, there was nobody at the cemetery, especially nobody having a picnic.
But she didn't say anything about going to visit your father, or you didn't talk about your father when?
No.
It was just something you did.
No.
Yeah.
We just didn't talk about it. But we'd bring flowers, though.
When did you first decide that you wanted to be an artist?
At 11, and I remember being very focused, and then in high school I took a lot of art classes, but I was not really serious until Fresno State when I took the course from Judy Chicago. She taught a class for women only, so it would help women to be empowered to become artists, and that's when I made a really strong decision.
So how do you remember participating in that feminist art program, shaping your idea about what it meant to be an artist?
We had permission to take an idea and really run with it. And I remember I was looking at photos that my mother had taken of herself and her friend Olga. This was in the 1940s. And it just said, "One day it rained, so Olga and I dressed in our formals." It's really a neat photograph. And then my friend Jan and I, who was also in Judy's class, we decided to dress up and photograph ourselves. And that was really the start of this kind of driven artistic experience. We showed the photos we'd taken to Judy, our teacher. She said right away, she said, "Get a better camera, really, these are great, but you need to really develop it. You need to go further with it." And it was very exciting.
Seems like part of what was important and exciting about that program is that you had the permission to make artwork out of whatever happened to be intriguing to you, like finding your mother's old photos, dressing up, activities that before that time might not have been considered even to be art, to just sort of see where it would take you.
And I think it opened up this really excited feeling, because also around that time, I remember going to San Francisco and going to revisit Playland and that Cliff House Museum, which was still there. Playland was torn down, I think, in 1972, and I think I went in 1970 and saw it, and I felt inspired by things from my childhood.
What did it feel like to see it again? all those years later?
Well, it felt really wonderful, actually, because it was kind of tawdry by then. There was something kind of sad, but beautiful, but sad, that really caught my attention.
There's a quality of beautiful and sad that runs throughout your work.
Yes, I think so.
That's a kind of a central mystery.
Over the years, I've collected, various stuff. I used to go, often there used to be abandoned houses. I would often go in and pull the curtains down and use those in my artwork, just old, rotting, dotted Swiss fabric.
Wow, abandoned houses in Fresno or in Los Angeles?
Both. I remember one in Fresno going and finding a huge old trunk with all kinds of things in it, and I got a friend to help me drag it out, and that house burned down a couple of weeks later. So, I didn't really think of it as stealing.
It seems like you have a really special appreciation for things that have been cast off or forgotten or abandoned, and it's almost like you want to bring them back to life and shine a special light on them. Do you have a sense of where that impulse comes from?
Well, part of it, I think, comes from wanting these fragments or remnants from the past that still exist, like especially after someone dies and their things are still here, they're gone, but wanting to transform it.
You've sometimes talked about feeling an almost desperate longing to go back in time. You've talked about dreaming that you belonged in the past and that time would be slow and you wouldn't have this feeling of trying to rush through things.
I've been thinking about that dream lately, because it was a dream I wrote in my old journals, that I had gone back in time, and it was this sort of golden, slow feeling, but somehow I got forced into the future, and I was very upset about that. I think it had to do with my father dying and gone, and suddenly that part of my childhood that was carefree, I didn't think about time being rushed, it was never the same. So I think that has something to do with it. Also, I just had this thought, my mother, and this was after we moved back to Fresno, had a friend who we would go visit. So my mother's friend who lived with her elderly mother in this old farmhouse. It was actually on the corner of Fresno Street and Olive. And I remember going there with her. We'd step up on this old wood porch. The front door had an oval glass, beveled glass in the door. And when we'd go inside, it was like going back in time, because it was old rose wallpaper. There were portraits or like old photographs that were hanging kind of at an angle, lace curtains, everything about that house was the way it looked that I responded to, the visual. And I think I've used that same visual in my artwork.
Even before your father's death, you always had a fascination with things that seemed to be in a state of decay or that would remind you of a time that was already past. The Cliff House and the Playland that already felt like they were a bit run down when you visited as a child, or the Easter bonnet that was decayed and transfigured. Like you had a special kind of awareness or feeling for the passage of time.
Yes, that's true, I did. And I'm not exactly sure where it came from. I do remember when my father was still alive, we were all in the car, we were driving from San Rafael into San Francisco, and we were on the Golden Gate Bridge, and I remember the sun was going down, and I remember him in the car. He never drove because he was from the Bronx. He was always on a ship. He never learned to drive, but my mother was driving, all the kids in the car, and I remember looking at the sun setting and telling myself that I wanted to make that time mark time, that I wanted to always remember that, and I always have. And it's bittersweet because I think it was shortly after that that he was sick and then died. But I have that memory. And of course, what could be better than going across the Golden Gate Bridge at sunset? You know, just with all of us together. And I would do things like that as a kid, like really like want to, it's maybe why people take photos. You want to freeze that time or that memory or that visual. For me, it was always visual.